I want to switch topics for a second. With this distortion, and you kind of said like unreality, you guys have been doing a lot of follow up reporting on the Duma attacks or alleged attacks from last year in Syria. And a second whistleblower recently came out to basically show like physics and technological information that was suppressed. And it seems that the original report was lacking pretty much the majority of the evidence to show that there wasn't a chemical attack there. And actually, I don't know if you noticed, but yesterday a Newsweek reporter actually announced on Twitter that he resigned from
Yeah,
Newsweek because they were trying to suppress this Newsweek. Tariq Haddad
yeah.
resigned because he was trying to report information that he had gathered that cast doubt on this attack too. Can you kind of talk about, because it seems like in the case of the Venezuelan embassy, obviously the Secret Service was working with the Venezuelan opposition, but in the case of Syria, it seems like there's a lot of distortions and just concocted information, and groups like Bellingcat are very involved with that.
Absolutely. And the groups like Bellingcat are very involved in the campaign to silence us. And Elliot Higgins, the founder of Bellingcat, was pushing phony information about my arrest on the day of. So, or the day that the warrant was revealed. So, I actually went through Duma recently in September, and I saw Duma, and I was with a former resident of Duma who had to leave because um, part of his property was being turned into a recruitment center by Jaish al-Islam, the Saudi-funded U.S. armed extremist militia. Um, it was bad. And you know what he told me was what so many Syrians told me. This wasn't someone who worked for the Syrian government, by the way. It was that we were watching this whole operation where the government was taking back the eastern suburbs of Damascus. They were winning. They'd taken almost everything back except this little pocket where there was one extremist wing of Jaish al-Islam that refused to negotiate. And then all of a sudden, the White Helmets, which the US and the UK funded as part of their perception management operations, came forward and said, oh, there's a chemical attack. And every time the Syrian military was gaining territory and the world was watching, there would be some allegation of a chemical attack. So what he said is, we knew there wasn't a chemical attack. There was no need for the government to do it. They had won already, but there was a strong need for a defeated opposition to do it, because what happens when you allege a chemical attack and you can plausibly convince the government in Washington that one occurred? The red line is tripped. The red line was stupidly imposed by Obama under pressure from Israeli and Gulf intelligence. And yeah, as a former Obama advisor told Charles Glass in Harper's, a red line is an invitation for a false flag. And so that's what we saw in Duma. We had journalists come in there like Robert Fisk and, interview people who said there was no chemical attack. Witnesses were put forward. Unfortunately, they were put forward by the Russian government, but they were just people, common people from Duma, who were actually videotaped, including a child being videotaped, being hosed off by White Helmets and members of the State Department funded Syrian American Medical Society in and around Duma. And they said, no, there was no chemical attack. They just started spraying us with water for no reason, and we were lied to. And then you have this whole operation in the US to convince the public that a chemical attack actually occurred, to justify the fact that the Trump administration actually bombed Syria on the basis of what was a complete lie. And besides the New York Times, which worked with this shady group Forensic Architecture to show these cartoon images of a chlorine canister falling on a bed to demonstrate how it was done. I think they won an award for that cartoon show. Besides, Robert Mackey, this New York Times retread who got hired by The Intercept, who attacked all of the skeptics on Duma as crazy conspiracists. Aside from all that, you have Bellingcat, which was not just kind of involved in influencing the mindset of the American public and trying to cultivate support for attacking Syria. It appears that they were involved in the OPCW investigation as a substitute for actual scientific field investigators. And this is an organization that never leaves their bedrooms. They don't go into the field. That's the whole point of them. They just basically create a case using what they call crowdsourced journalism or open source journalism, that Russia or Syria did this or that evil thing. And in this case, they are really on the defensive because they apparently contributed to a phony OPCW report that was doctored, in which 3 U.S. officials came to the OPCW and began threatening its investigative team and demanding that they push the official line, which they sort of proceeded to do in a very harebrained fashion. And so they said there were organochlorophosphates. There were organophosphate chlorine was present on the scene, which means that there could have been bleach there. Pretty much there could have been a swimming pool nearby, could have been house cleaner, but nobody proved that there was chlorine. And now we have 2 OPCW whistleblowers coming out of the woodwork to declare that the report was phony. Jose Bustani, the first director of the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, actually interviewed and spoke with those whistleblowers and concluded that they were right, that this appeared to have been a false flag. Jonathan Steele and a number of journalists have met with them as well and concluded that they were extremely credible. And so we're left with the whole media, the whole mainstream media, ignoring this catastrophic deception in which the U.S. public was lied into war again by this vast perception management apparatus and by the Trump administration. We should be outraged about it, but most people don't know about it. The media was all over it.
And a second whistleblower basically showed that the chemical levels in this building were no different than on street level.
Exactly. So these are real scientists.
Right. And what I find even more appalling, and it's not the first time, but U.S. Trump dropped bombs before inspectors even went in there. So talk about forming a narrative.
Yeah, it was not just a rush to judgment, it was a rush to bombing to prevent the inspectors from arriving in time. But what we did have in this case, I mean, remember 2017, there was the Khan Sheikhoun supposed sarin gas attack in Idlib, and that was an area that the press and inspectors couldn't even get to because it was controlled by Al-Qaeda, by these extremist elements. I mean, the rest of the world was terrified to go there because of who controlled the area. And so there was no chain of custody for the OPCW investigation about that. Basically, they trusted a bunch of extremist proxies and the Turkish government, which was funding and arming them, to provide them with the samples from the scene. So there's no way we can trust what happened there. But we should be asking a lot of questions. First, why is Bellingcat being celebrated? Why did it win an Emmy for this documentary about them? Just as the White Helmets won an Oscars, how our culture, our popular culture is being used to instill support for regime change wars and deceptions, interventionist deceptions. We should be asking why the OPCW is stonewalling reporters and refusing to discuss this. We should be asking about, you mentioned Newsweek refusing to run a story on this. Newsweek ran countless stories working hand in glove with the PR, the public relations group that worked for the White Helmets, the Syria campaign, to push intervention in Syria. So we should be asking questions about the mainstream media and supporting the journalists who are actually asking these questions and doing this work. And then finally, and most disturbingly, we should be asking who those bodies were that we saw and we were told that these were these supposed chemical weapons victims. Who were they and how were they killed and where are they buried? Were they killed by the extremist armed opposition? Were members of the White Helmets involved in setting them up and filming them? Who is involved in this and where are the bodies? Because no one will tell us where those bodies are.
And obviously, one of the strategies is when you present facts you're then propagandized as an Assad apologist.
Yep.
That seems to be the playbook of most of these outfits, even though they can't or don't even try to dispute the facts you just presented.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be talking about Assad, and he probably would still be having dinners with Nancy Pelosi and John Kerry, and probably, you know, Tulsi Gabbard wouldn't have been the only person to visit him, and what she did was not to visit him and be, pat him on the back, but to actually, she was there to work on de-escalating this proxy war, which I think was much braver than what Pelosi and Kerry were trying to do. But we wouldn't be even talking about him unless the U.S. had invested $1 billion into this dirty war to carry out regime change and destroy independent state that just simply wasn't in the U.S. sphere of influence. None of us would even be thinking about it. And honestly, like I when I was in Syria, I didn't meet many Assadists. Most of the people I met were very critical of the government, but they just didn't want the state to collapse. And they'd say, well, Assad kept the state together, and that's the best we can say for him. And then they would, proceed to complain about sanctions, which were fueling corruption and the destruction of their economy before their eyes. These were the things Syrians talked about. Or they would complain about the security state, about how when the state comes under attack, the reformist elements in the government are immediately rolled over and steamrolled by this harsh security state. And so that's what they have to deal with now, thanks to this intervention and dirty war. So it was hard to even meet Assadists there. What does it even mean to be an Assadist? What does it represent? I can understand when someone says, you're a communist or a Marxist, or they use this word tanky now, but I don't even know what this means. What it simply is a way to kind of shut people down, to blacklist people, and to, further marginalize independent journalists who are actually asking the hard questions that everyone should be asking.
Max, I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time, and we'll stay in touch as you announce what you plan to do in response to your false arrest. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks for what you're doing.
Okay. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.